Mr. Darcy, women want him, men quietly want to be him, and almost no one can explain exactly why. I spent 30 days watching Pride and Prejudice, studying the way he stands, the way he speaks, the things he refuses to say. And what I found wasn't just a romantic hero. Mr. Darcy is a system. He is a walking, breathing map of how power, class, and taste operate. Not just in 19th century England, but right now, in the world we live in today. Welcome to Lady Susanna. Join me for tea as we decode what's really happening beneath the surface of the films you love, the hidden language of class, money, taste, and status that most people never notice, but everyone feels. The first time we see Mr. Darcy, he's at the Meryton ball. He steps into the room, and within 60 seconds, the entire social ecosystem rearranges itself around him. People say he's arrogant, he's rude, he looks down on everyone. But here's what I say after 30 days of studying him. He's not performing arrogance. He's performing something far more interesting. He's performing absence. Watch the scene again. While Mr. Bingley laughs, leans forward, touches people's arms, asks questions, Darcy does the opposite. He stands still. He doesn't pursue conversation. He doesn't try to charm anyone. He withholds, and the room notices. Our first key concept for this channel is aesthetic distance. Aesthetic distance is the gap someone keeps emotionally, physically, socially, to signal that they operate on a different level. The less you visibly want, the more power you project. It sounds backwards because we're taught that warmth draws people in. And it does, but only at certain levels. At the top of a hierarchy, warmth gets replaced by restraint. Needing approval isn't just uncomfortable, it's a weakness. And once you see it, you'll never watch a film the same way again. Think about it in your own life. Who do you associate with dignity, with power, with genuine class? It's almost never the loudest person in the room. It's the person who doesn't need to perform, who doesn't laugh too hard, doesn't speak too much, doesn't seem to want anything from anyone. There's something magnetic about that stillness, something that commands attention, precisely because it isn't chasing it. This is aesthetic distance in action, power expressed not through what you do, but what you choose not to do. And no character in cinema embodies this more purely than Mr. Darcy. He doesn't smile on command. He doesn't dance because it's expected of him. He withholds. Because he withholds, every room he enters quietly reorganizes itself around a single anxious question. What does he think of us? That's not arrogance. That's social architecture. The man who needs nothing from the room controls the room. When Darcy says, "She's tolerable, I suppose, but not handsome enough to tempt me," that line is almost universally read as arrogance. And it is, but it's also aesthetic distance in real time. He is publicly refusing to be tempted, refusing to participate in the social ritual of admiring the available women in the room, refusing to perform desire on command. That refusal is offensive to everyone present. And it is absolutely magnetic on screen. Because here's the psychological trick. When someone withholds approval, we want it more. We are wired to read selective approval as a signal of high value. If Darcy had praised Elizabeth at Meryton, she would have been flattered and moved on. Because he withholds it, she and we can't let it go. His silence isn't a character flaw. It is his most sophisticated social move. Here's something the romanticizing of Darcy almost always misses. His coldness is not cruelty, it is armor. In Regency England, a man's public attention toward a woman was itself a social contract. Looking meant interest. Interest meant intention. Intention meant obligation. So when Darcy refuses to look at Elizabeth, that refusal is not rudeness. It is self-protection through social withdrawal. He has everything to lose by appearing to want something, because wanting something is vulnerability. It signals that you can be moved, that you can be gotten to. And a man with £10,000 a year, master of Pemberley, the weight of an entire estate and bloodline on his shoulders, cannot afford to be gotten to by just anyone. This is the hidden tragedy that films about wealth rarely makes explicit. The higher your status, the more constrained your authentic self. The more you have, the more carefully you must manage how you are perceived. And this is where the film becomes genuinely radical. Because Elizabeth Bennet, who has almost nothing by the standards of her world, is the freest person in it. She laughs loudly, she argues, she walks across muddy fields and arrives with her hem dirty and her eyes bright. She has very little social capital to protect, and so she can afford to be entirely herself. Darcy with everything is trapped. Elizabeth with nothing is free. That is a class analysis hiding inside a love story. Director Joe Wright and Matthew Mafajan's performance comes together to create something film analysis often overlook. Every gesture, posture, and glance says something about power and tells you exactly where a person ranks in society. Watch Darcy's body throughout the film. His posture is upright, contained, controlled. His hands are almost always still, either clasped behind his back or resting at his sides with deliberate restraint. He takes up space but never sprawls into it. He moves through rooms like someone who has never had to compete for attention, never had to prove he belongs. Now contrast that with the Bennet household. It's full of movement, noise, and overlap. Voices talk over each other. Bodies are in constant motion. Mrs. Bennet's nervous energy fills every room she enters. Lydia is impulsive and unfiltered. Even Elizabeth, though more composed, is quick and expressive, alive in a way that spills outward. These aren't just personality differences. They are class differences expressed through the body. This brings us to our second concept, distinction. Distinction is the ability to signal status without trying. It's when your behavior, your taste, even your stillness quietly communicates that you belong at a certain level and you don't need to announce it. Darcy's stillness isn't calculated in the moment. It's the result of a lifetime of being told, implicitly and explicitly, that he doesn't need to perform for anyone, that other people adjust to him. That's distinction, that's class, written into the spine. And this is precisely where the film reveals its complexity, because it is not simply celebrating Darcy's restraint, it's also questioning it. There's a beautiful tension at the heart of the story, the same qualities that make Darcy powerful in aristocratic society makes him emotionally illegible to Elizabeth. His silence, which reads as dignity to some, reads as contempt to others. His aesthetic distance, which functions as a status signal, also functions as a wall. This is the film's first radical insight. The tools that win you status can cost you connection. Think about that in the context of your own life. How often do we perform coolness, emotional distance, studied nonchalance, the deliberate lack of interest? Because we've learned somewhere that needing things is embarrassing. That enthusiasm is uncool. That caring too much makes you look somehow poor in some social sense of the word. This is not a 19th century problem. This is a today problem. This is a social media problem. This is every comment section where someone performs indifference to look sophisticated. Darcy is us at our most defended, at our most status conscious. Now here's where most Darcy analysis stops. It describes his coldness, celebrates the thaw, calls it a love story, and moves on. But I want to uncover the arc differently, because the transformation of Mr. Darcy across this film is not actually a love story. It's a class story. The moment the armor first breaks is the first proposal scene, and it is one of the most socially revealing moments in the entire film. Darcy does something that, by his own code, he should never do. He confesses. He admits want. He says,
I don't understand. I love you most ardently.
This is a man whose entire social identity is built on aesthetic distance, on the idea that he cannot be moved, telling us that he has been completely moved, and he's furious about it. Watch Matthew McFadyen's face in that scene. This is a man in genuine crisis. He has done something his entire identity forbids. He has been moved by someone his social world told him was beneath him, and he cannot reconcile it. This is not a romantic failure. This is a man whose deepest conditioning is colliding with something his class system never prepared him for. Let me introduce the concept of habitus. Habitus is everything your upbringing quietly taught you without ever saying a word. It's not what you were told to like. It's what you just do and like instinctively. The way you carry yourself in a room. What feels beautiful to you versus what feels cheap. Who you naturally feel comfortable around and who makes you uneasy. You didn't choose any of it consciously. It was absorbed. And that's exactly what makes it so powerful. It doesn't feel like class conditioning. It feels like you. Darcy's habitus is aristocratic England. He has been raised, trained really, to move through the world in a very specific way. His posture, his silences, his reluctance to dance with strangers, his discomfort with the Bennet family's chaos. None of this is personal. It is habitual, so deeply embedded that he barely notices it. His restraint isn't coldness. It is the ingrained belief that restraint is the highest form of elegance. His habitus tells him Elizabeth Bennet is beneath him. By every metric Regency aristocracy would recognize. That's correct. And yet his feelings tell him something else entirely. And the entire second half of this film is the story of that internal war. His letter to Elizabeth after the failed proposal, long, devastating, explanatory, is the beginning of his habitus breaking. He is explaining himself to someone he was socially conditioned to never have to explain himself to. That act alone is a radical departure from who he was at Meryton. Then there's Pemberley. Pemberley is not just a house, it is a text, and Elizabeth, who is above all things a reader, reads it. Pemberley is the first time Elizabeth is allowed to really read Darcy in his native language. Not words, but taste. She arrives believing that she will never see him again. And that's exactly why this visit matters so much. For once, she isn't watching Darcy perform. She's watching the world he's built where there is no audience. The film frames the estate like a book being opened. Long, quiet shots. Almost no dialogue. Elizabeth moving through halls and galleries, less like a guest on a tour and more like someone wandering a museum, decoding what she sees. Pemberley is where everything we've been talking about finally becomes visible. is not just a pile of wealth. It is his taste arranged into rooms. In the book, the housekeeper gives us the official account. Darcy as best landlord, best brother, morally upright leader. But Elizabeth doesn't just take her words for it. She cross-checks those claims against the environment. The rooms are large but not cluttered. The color palette is muted. The art is serious, not showy. This isn't money screaming for attention. It's confidence that doesn't need to shout. And this is why the common interpretation of the scene misses the point. She doesn't suddenly fall in love with him because of the house. She isn't dazzled by wealth. She's struck by coherence. The Pemberley she walks through reveals the man she is just starting to see underneath all that social armor. Disciplined but not cruel, proud but not vain, protective without needing to show off. The camera's long pause on Darcy's sculpture is the key. It's literally Darcy without motion, without performance. No stiff ballroom posture, no carefully controlled expression. None of the aesthetic distance he uses as armor in public. The marble version is almost tender. The jaw is less tight. The gaze is almost gentle. By lingering on it, the film turns what could have been background decor into a revelation. This is the one moment Elizabeth can look at him without being looked back at. The usual power dynamic flips. The man who controls every room becomes an object of observation, and she is free to study him with no social cost. The statue becomes a caption for the entire estate, quietly saying, "Here is the private Darcy, the public mask never allowed you to see." Now compare that to Rosings Park, Lady Catherine's domain. Whereas Pemberley feels proportioned and almost organic, Rosings feels crowded and heavy, thick drapery, crowded, ornate surfaces, rooms that announce importance instead of embodying it. Lady Catherine is like her house, loud, over-decorated, and always demanding attention, because her presence doesn't naturally command respect the way Pemberley does. Put simply, Pemberley is calm. It's spacious, balanced, almost quiet in how it shows its wealth. It's saying, "I belong here. I don't need to prove anything." Lady Catherine's house is the opposite. Every room is busy and over-decorated, pushing itself at you, almost shouting, "Don't forget I outrank you." Both houses are rich, but only one feels confident. Pemberley's quiet luxury, its refusal to be ostentatious, is taste as conviction. Rosings is wealth as performance, constantly reminding you who holds the power. Elizabeth feels that difference immediately. Rosings makes her want to laugh. Pemberley makes her fall silent. At Rosings, she sees power trying to intimidate. At Pemberley, she sees power that doesn't need to. That gap is everything. It's the difference between just having money and actually having taste. Between using status as armor and letting taste reveal who you really are. So when Elizabeth walks through Pemberley, she isn't thinking, "I misjudged him. He's richer than I thought." She's thinking, "I misread him. His world doesn't match the arrogance I saw at the Meryton ball." The estate's restraint, its care for landscape, its lack of vulgar display, all of that confirms the housekeeper's description and contradicts the story Wickham told her. Then Darcy appears at home without the ballroom script. He's awkward, yes, but he's also oddly open, embracing Georgiana with genuine warmth that dissolves his aesthetic distance. In that sequence, everything lines up. The house, the art, the sister, the man. For the first time, Elizabeth encounters Darcy in a space where he isn't performing class for anyone. And the result is not emptiness, but integrity. That's why the scene hits us so hard, even if we've always been told it's the rich guy's house moment. It's not. It's the moment the performance collapses and the environment finally tells the truth. And then there's Georgiana. Watch the moment Darcy is reunited with his younger sister. The man who could not bring himself to smile at a room full of strangers, who withheld warmth like it was currency he couldn't afford to spend, embraced her immediately, openly, without calculation. The aesthetic distance dissolves completely. That moment is not incidental. It's the film showing us the truth beneath the performance. The restraint was never about coldness. It was always about protection. At Pemberley, he is different. He's warmer, more human. And the reason is precise. At Pemberley, he is not performing. He is home. He is not in a ballroom, not at an assembly, not stuck inside those silent hierarchies where every glance is a negotiation. None of that exists here. And because he feels safe, the armor drops. Not because he's trying to impress Elizabeth, but because, for once, he has nothing to defend. Georgiana makes this visible in a way no other character can. She is his vulnerability made visible. The subplot around Wickham's attempt to manipulate her tells us that Darcy's controlled exterior was not born from arrogance. It was forged from pain. He learned early that openness had consequences, that the wrong people given access would exploit it. So the man who refuses to perform warmth for a ballroom full of strangers is the same man who wraps his arms around his sister like the rest of the world has disappeared. That contrast is the whole film in a single scene. The public self and the private self, and the enormous, exhausting difference between them. That is what moves Elizabeth, not the money, but the authenticity behind the aesthetics. This brings us to a concept I want to share: expressive wealth. Expressive wealth is when what you own doesn't just signal that you have resources. It reveals what you actually value. It's not wealth used to intimidate or impress. It's wealth used to express an inner life. That's the crucial difference here. Rosings is wealth as performance. Pemberley is wealth as expression. One shouts, "Look at my status." The other quietly says, "This is who I am." Elizabeth isn't changing her mind because Darcy is rich. She's changing her mind because Pemberley contradicts his performance. It shows her the private self beneath the public mask. And that private self is recognizable, principled, capable of real love. At the Meryton ball, Darcy's taste performs exclusion. It says, "I am above this." But Pemberley says something entirely different. It says, "This is what I love." The landscape, the art, the books, the loyalty, the sister he would burn the world down to protect. The arc, properly uncovered, is not the story of a cold man who learns to love. It is the story of a man so completely imprisoned by class identity, so thoroughly conditioned to believe that being seen is being vulnerable, that love becomes the only force powerful enough to break him out of it. Not love as sentiment, love as disruption, the one thing his social performance has no defense against, because it doesn't ask him to perform at all. It asks him for the first time to simply be. And Pemberley is where Elizabeth first glimpses that possibility, not in spite of the house, but through it. Which raises a question worth sitting with. Why does this still work on us? Darcy was written over 200 years ago, and yet the archetype doesn't age. He reappears constantly, on screen, in fiction, in every brooding, withholding, aesthetically distanced that culture keeps insisting we find irresistible. That staying power is not nostalgia for Regency England. It's because the social logic he embodies hasn't changed at all. We still read stillness as depth, withholding as power. We still interpret controlled, aesthetically distant behavior as a signal of high value. In people, in brands, in design, in art. The most expensive luxury houses barely advertise. The most prestigious restaurants have the plainest menu. The wealthiest neighborhoods are the quietest. The most powerful people in the room are usually the ones saying the least. Distinction operating in full force right now, today, dressed in different clothes, but running on the same logic it always has. Darcy is attractive because he is legible as high value through the very mechanism our culture uses to signal high value. His restraint, his space, his absolute refusal to perform for approval. We have been trained across centuries of cultural inheritance to read that refusal as worth. And Pride and Prejudice doesn't just illustrate that. It interrogates it, because what Elizabeth discovers at Pemberley is the thing our culture rarely admits. The most magnetic kind of status isn't the one that shuts you out. It's the one that quietly invites you in. We spend so much of our lives learning how to perform, how to signal the right things to the right people at the right moment. We learn aesthetic distance before we even have a name for it. We learn to want less visibly, to care more quietly, to protect ourselves by appearing not to need protection. And Pride and Prejudice ask a question that feels almost uncomfortable in its simplicity. What is that performance costing you? Because Darcy wins every room and is completely alone in all of them. Until the one moment he stops performing, until the one person in the room refuses to be impressed by the performance and insists on something real. Elizabeth doesn't fall in love with his status. She doesn't fall in love with the distance, the restraint, the distinction. She falls in love with what breaks through it. And that shift from performance to authenticity, from status to substance, is where the entire film reveals what it's actually about. Not just who we admire, but why, and what we've been trained to mistake for value in the first place. If this conversation made you see something you hadn't noticed before, in Darcy, in film, in yourself, subscribe and come back next week, because we are just getting started. And before you go, I want to hear from you. Is there someone in your life whose restraint you've mistaken for coldness, or whose warmth you've mistaken for weakness? Leave it in the comments. The most interesting conversation always happens there. Next week, return to Elizabeth Bennet, the one person in this film who refuses to confuse performance with truth. She sees clearly from the beginning, and she's willing to pay the price for it. And we're going to ask something deeper. How do you live inside a system built on status without letting it define who you are? I'll see you next week.